Bugatti occupies a space in the automotive world that is almost mythical. The brand doesn't just sell cars, it sells a narrative of absolute supremacy. Every Chiron, every Veyron, every Tourbillon is presented as a masterpiece that exists beyond the reach of mere mortals, a fusion of art and engineering so advanced that it requires a dedicated team of specialists in Molsheim, France, to keep alive. The public has been fed this narrative for years. Bugatti owners don't take their cars to local mechanics. They don't scour eBay for used parts. They don't even change their own oil. The official line is that these vehicles are too sophisticated, too dangerous, and too valuable to be entrusted to anyone outside the factory's inner circle. And for a long time, that narrative held. Bugatti cultivated an aura of exclusivity that made its cars not just desirable but untouchable. Repair costs were shrouded in myth. Stories circulated of $150,000 headlights and $20,000 oil changes, adding to the legend that Bugatti ownership was a commitment beyond the financial reach of all but the ultra-wealthy. This was a brand that, by design, existed in a realm of its own. But the image was always more fragile than it appeared. The hypercar world is built on mystique, but mystique requires information control. The moment that control slips, questions start to emerge. And the man who would become the catalyst for that slip was a young British YouTuber named Matt Armstrong, who had built a following by doing exactly what Bugatti said was impossible. He fixed things. Matt Armstrong was no stranger to supercar rebuilds. The Leicester-born mechanic had made a career out of bringing wrecked exotics back from the dead, often documenting the process for his millions of followers. He'd resurrected Lamborghinis, Ferraris, and even a Rolls-Royce belonging to footballer Marcus Rashford. But when he heard about a Bugatti Chiron per Sport that had been written off in a crash in Los Angeles, he knew this would be different. The car belonged to Alex Gonzalez, a Miami-based influencer who had crashed the hypercar during a stunt. The insurance payout had been made, the car was declared a total loss, and it had been sent to a Copart salvage auction. But Gonzalez, for sentimental reasons, bought it back and recruited Armstrong to attempt the impossible: rebuild one of the rarest cars in the world from the ground up. Early on, however, something didn't add up. When Armstrong started trying to source parts, he hit a wall. Bugatti had locked the car's VIN number, essentially blacklisting it from any official dealership network. No parts, no support, no cooperation. Armstrong was effectively being told by the manufacturer that his project was dead on arrival. He put out an SOS in one of his videos, expressing disbelief that a luxury brand would go to such lengths to prevent a private owner from repairing their own car. But even as the obstacles mounted, Armstrong pressed forward. The early warning signs were there for anyone paying attention. Why would a company that prides itself on engineering excellence refuse to sell parts to a paying customer? Was this about safety, or was it about control? The questions were just beginning. Then came the moment that escalated everything into a full-blown controversy. Bugatti CEO Mate Rimac, arguably the most powerful figure in the hypercar industry, took to social media to respond directly to Armstrong's project. It was an extraordinary move, the head of a billion-dollar automotive empire publicly addressing a YouTuber's DIY repair. Rimac's response was measured but firm. He dismissed many of the viral price claims circulating online. Those $150,000 headlights? Not true, he said. The actual cost was closer to $50,000. He also pushed back against Armstrong's suggestion that some parts could be 3D printed. While Bugatti itself uses 3D printing in its manufacturing, Rimac argued that the complexity of the components required millions in R&D and couldn't be replicated by a home operation. But his most pointed comments were about safety. Rimac revealed that the Chiron's monocoque was structurally damaged and the gearbox housing had been shattered. According to him, only 2 facilities in the world had the equipment to properly split the chassis and repair the damage. Repairing the car without factory supervision, he warned, was not just risky, but potentially deadly. He claimed Bugatti had made a fair offer to carry out the repairs for $1.7 million, which was later reduced to $600,000, but Gonzalez had declined. Armstrong, in turn, responded that it was Gonzalez's choice to pursue an independent rebuild because he feared that once the car went to Bugatti in France, the costs would spiral out of control. The back and forth was escalating, and the tension was palpable. Insider sources began fueling speculation that this was less about safety and more about brand protection. The real question was no longer whether the car could be repaired, but who would win the battle for control. As Armstrong continued documenting the rebuild, the contradictions between Bugatti's official stance and reality became impossible to ignore. The evidence started piling up. In one viral video, Armstrong pointed out that the Bugatti Chiron's airbags shared part numbers with those used in an Audi A3. This revelation was explosive. If a $6 million hypercar contained components from a mass-market hatchback, what did that say about the entire mythology of bespoke engineering? Armstrong also found other cross-brand parts. BMW-sourced components, shared VW Group electronics. It turned out the Chiron wasn't built entirely from unobtainium. This was a gold mine for the YouTuber, and the viewership numbers skyrocketed. But it also made Bugatti's position seem increasingly untenable. If some parts were shared with other manufacturers, why was Bugatti blocking the sale of replacements? Why was the VIN blacklisted? Then came Armstrong's most audacious move. In a gamble that many described as madness, Armstrong and his team managed to split the Bugatti Chiron in half in a standard workshop. Bugatti had claimed that only 2 facilities in the world had the specialized equipment to perform this task. Armstrong used a homemade contraption involving wooden boards, car jacks, and quite famously, wheels from garbage can. The evidence was undeniable. The car's chassis could indeed be separated without the mythical million-dollar equipment Bugatti insisted was necessary. It was a moment of pure David versus Goliath victory. But the biggest revelation was yet to come. In the process of splitting the chassis, Armstrong discovered a massive fracture in the transmission mounting bracket, a catastrophic failure that had likely contributed to the crash. This wasn't just a superficial accident. The car had sustained severe structural damage. But Armstrong's team wasn't deterred. They scanned the broken bracket and prepared to fabricate their own replacement using custom manufacturing techniques. The turning point came when Armstrong made a public plea to Rimac. In a video, he expressed disbelief that the CEO of Bugatti was even watching his content, let alone engaging with it. He said he didn't want to start a beef, he just wanted a solution. He offered to take full responsibility for the rebuild, even if it meant voiding any warranties. He just needed the parts. But Bugatti stood firm. Rimac clarified that it wasn't just about parts, it was about safety certification, brand integrity, and the long-term value of the car. Bugatti wanted its vehicles to last 50 or even 100 years, and that required maintenance to be carried out to exacting standards. If Armstrong's rebuild failed or caused an accident, the headlines would read, "Bugatti crashes, not DIY rebuild goes wrong." The company had a reputation to protect. Armstrong's response was defiant. "Of course, we're not going to be able to do it to Bugatti's factory standards. But again, we're going to give it a go," he said. He was betting on his ingenuity and his team's expertise. This was the clash of worlds, the highly controlled, corporate hypercar elite versus the determined, working-class mechanic from the Midlands. But the most dramatic moment was yet to come. In a later video, Armstrong made a mistake that nearly cost him the entire project. He accidentally squashed a fuel tank pressure sensor between sections of the body during reassembly. To fix it, he had to undo the titanium bolts and risk splitting the chassis apart again, the very nightmare scenario Bugatti had warned about. It was a tense moment that showed just how fragile the project was and how close Armstrong came to losing everything. Yet, he solved it with resourcefulness, cutting a small access point to replace the sensor. It was a microcosm of the entire battle, constant obstacles met with relentless determination. Now, it was time to look at the bigger picture. What was really going on between Bugatti and Matt Armstrong? Was this solely about safety, or was there something deeper at play? On one hand, Bugatti had legitimate points. The Chiron is engineered for speeds over 400 kilometers per hour and produces 1,500 horsepower. Mistakes in repairs could have catastrophic consequences. The car's monocoque was indeed damaged, and the gearbox fractures were severe. Any independent repair would carry risks that Bugatti couldn't control or endorse. On the other hand, Armstrong had exposed uncomfortable truths. Many of Bugatti's parts were shared with cheaper vehicles, contradicting the narrative of bespoke exclusivity. He had demonstrated that the chassis could be separated without factory equipment, and his determination to rebuild the car with his own hands resonated with millions of viewers who resented corporate control. Some insiders suggested that this was really about right to repair, a major battle that was brewing in the automotive industry. A new EU law, set to come into force on July 31st, 2026, promised to give consumers the legal right to repair or modify products like cars, and manufacturers would be obliged to supply spare parts. This saga was the perfect case study for the debate. Armstrong himself hinted that there might be someone else behind Rimac's words. In a podcast interview, he said the tone had shifted and that he suspected Rimac was being overruled by others within Bugatti. Was the CEO genuinely sympathetic to Armstrong but constrained by corporate pressures? Or was this all a carefully managed PR strategy to protect the brand's mystique? There was also the question of money. Armstrong had spent over $1.9 million to buy the crashed Chiron. The official repair quote from Bugatti was $1.7 million, later reduced to $600,000. If Armstrong's independent rebuild succeeded, he would prove that the astronomical costs Bugatti charged for repairs were not always justified. If he failed, he would reinforce the brand's narrative of engineering supremacy. The stakes could not have been higher. And then, Bugatti's CEO did the unthinkable. After months of public standoff, after the viral videos, after Armstrong had split the chassis, fabricated his own parts, and painstakingly reassembled the hypercar, mate Rimac extended an olive branch. Reports suggested that Bugatti was willing to help Armstrong, but on strict terms. It was a shocking reversal from the earlier blacklisting. The CEO, who had publicly warned against independent repairs, was now signaling a willingness to assist. But the details were even more shocking. According to sources, the new offer involved shipping the car to Bugatti's headquarters and providing a qualified engineer to supervise the rebuild, potentially offering technical support without compromising safety certification. It was a masterstroke of corporate diplomacy. What happened next would define the legacy of both men. Armstrong, the relentless underdog, had achieved the impossible, bringing a $6 million hypercar back from the brink with his own hands, proving that Bugatti's perceived fragility was a myth. The car's engine had been fired up successfully. Custom radiators, 3D printed parts, and Audi-sourced components had all worked together. Bugatti's warnings had been challenged, and Armstrong had won the popular battle. But the deeper truth was that Bugatti was protecting its brand. The company couldn't allow a YouTuber to make its cars look easy to fix. If the mystique of Bugatti was that they were untouchable masterpieces, then anyone repairing one outside the factory walls threatened that entire narrative. The CEO's initial refusal to sell parts wasn't about safety, it was about preserving exclusivity. And then came the unthinkable pivot, the offer to help Armstrong. It was a move of pure genius that simultaneously depicted the company as magnanimous while maintaining control. Did they help Armstrong out of goodwill? Or did they realize that it was better to have him, with them on a leash than against them? They couldn't stop his momentum, so they tried to join it. As Armstrong's saga continues, the automotive world is watching. The right to repair movement is gaining momentum. The EU legislation is imminent. And the message is clear. No matter how exclusive the brand, no matter how rarefied the machinery, the myth is only as strong as the control behind it. Matt Armstrong cracked that control, and the reverberations are being felt not just in the hypercar world, but in living rooms and garages everywhere. In the end, the greatest irony is this. A car that was supposed to be untouchable was saved by a man from Leicester who refused to take no for an answer. And a CEO who tried to stop him ended up being forced to cooperate. The hidden truth? Exclusivity is a fragile thing, and it only takes one man with a socket set and a camera to break it.